I want to thank our students. There's a lot of them in this room, so thank you for being here. Our faculty, they're kind of interspersed throughout. Our staff, alumni, thank you for being here. I want to say a special thanks to our community partners and leaders who've joined us today, including our friends from UMC, University Medical Center, and Nellis Air Force Base. So thank you for being here. We truly appreciate your support and collaboration. Thank you all to those who participated in our poster fair. It's our first time offering it this way. It was an incredible opportunity to showcase your research and scholarship. Please stay around after the lecture, after Dr. Webble is finished, because we will announce the top 3 best posters. So stick around. There were some really vigorous judging, apparently, that was happening out there, so that's exciting. Also, while I have this audience captive, I would like to share that this week is Rebels Give. You knew that, right? With special events and opportunities to donate to the School of Nursing, including a pie in the face contest, right? A challenge across the health sciences schools at Shadow Lane tomorrow. So if you're not doing anything, would like to pie myself, where's Hope? Hope right there, Hope Hinchman. And Lisa Nicholas, where's Lisa? She's in the other room, okay. You can choose any one of us to pie or all 3 of us to pie, okay. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., let's raise some money. We were the winners last year for raising the most number of dollars across the university, so we want to defend that title. Oh, there she is. Thank you, Dr. Nicholas. It will be a fun time, I promise you, and really it's for a good cause. So now back to the UHA lecture. The UHA lecture series is named after the school's first dean, Dr. Carolyn UHA, who's seated here at the front row. Please say hello. She is truly beloved and had made such a great mark on our school. Thank you for coming, and thank you for supporting our school still to this day. Just as impactful as Dr. UHA was during her time at the UNLV School of Nursing, the speakers for this lecture are handpicked, specially selected by our team because of the significant contributions they've made in the nursing profession. As we know, nursing offers many specialties and career paths to explore. And our speakers delight us not only with their knowledge and expertise, but also with their experience, and most importantly, their stories. And you'll hear such a great story tonight. Some of our previous speakers have included healthcare leaders like Dr. Margaret Heitkemper, if you know her, who discussed the move from biomarkers to intervention, and Dr. Cord Kober, who shared his work on systems biology. Last year, if you were here with us, we welcomed Dr. Lissy Henson, who spoke on collaborative nursing science and palliative care. I'm very proud to introduce this year's guest speaker, Dr. Allison Webble. I first met Dr. Webble when we went through the UCSF Leadership Institute training program together, a 6-month program. And her whole personhood immediately captivated me. When you see her come up, you'll see what. Yes, she's highly accomplished, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but more importantly, she's kind, she's warm, she's authentic, and uplifting to everyone who's had the pleasure to meet her or work with her. We could all use leaders like her. And Dr. Webble has these qualities in spades. We're truly honored to have Dr. Webble here with us today. And now for the very formal introduction part. Dr. Webble serves as the Associate Dean for Research and Innovation and the Endowed Health Promotion Professor at the University of Washington, UW, School of Nursing, as well as the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of the Association of Nurses in AIDS Care, JNAC. Dr. Webble earned her bachelor's degrees in both nursing and sociology, overachiever, from The Ohio State University, and her master's and PhD degrees from the University of California, San Francisco. She is globally recognized in clinical research focused on helping people with chronic illnesses live and age well. with emphasis on non-pharmacological approaches to healthy aging. She has spoken and published widely in this area with almost 200 articles in peer-reviewed journals, specifically on HIV and aging, behavioral science, and global health. She has received more than $50 million in extramural research funding from the NIH, specifically NINR, the National Institutes of Nursing Research, NHLBI, National Health, Lung and Blood Institute, NIA, National Institute of Aging, the American Heart Association, Gilead Sciences, Andy Hill Foundation, among others. I have to take a breath. That's a lot. She has received numerous honors and distinctions for her research, and her book, purchase it if you have, a few dollars, Living a Healthy Life with HIV, was named Book of the Year by the American Journal of Nursing. When she's not working, Dr. Webel enjoys traveling with her family and running, reading, and playing tennis. Maybe pickleball? You've tried that? No.
Never.
Never. Not a fan of pickleball. It's very popular here in Las Vegas. And in very recent news, Dr. Webel has been appointed as the next dean of the University of Michigan School of Nursing effective July 1st. So a big round of applause. So tonight we get to say a hearty congratulations to Dr. Webel and a big welcome to UNLV. Thank you, Dr. Webel.
Wow, Sigrid, that was an introduction. Everyone should be introduced by this woman because you make this feel like $1 million. So thank you for that kind introduction. Henna, thank you so much for inviting me to present this lecture and to spend a whole day with all of you. It has been a fast but absolutely fantastic day. And I just want to say, if you don't realize this, you have some of the best leadership in the nursing profession right here at UNLV. So I hope that you all relish your time as a student. I know it is a quick, is it 4 semesters? Quick 4 semesters, and I'm excited to spend some time with you this evening. Giving a keynote lecture is always a lot of pressure, right? But especially one that is endowed and named after a legend like Dr. Carolyn Yuha. I reflected on my more than 2 decades as a nurse and as a scientist, and I really tried to come up with some themes in a common thread through my personal and occasionally professional experiences. And so I ended up with this talk, and over the next 45 minutes or so, inspired by your own mascot, I will attempt to tell my own story of research and how failure, and sometimes being a rebel, has helped to fuel innovative science, or what I believe is at least innovative nurse science. So I'll start here, right? I'm a storyteller too, and probably like many of you, my nursing journey began in childhood. I was fortunate enough to be part of a very large immigrant family, and my dad and his family of 6 surviving kids immigrated here from the former Yugoslavia in the 1950s. My dad was the first of his family to attend college through, of all things, a football scholarship. His parents were extremely religious and did not approve of playing organized sports, and thereby going away to college to play such sports. After college, my dad moved back to Ohio, met my mom, and eventually settled down in a place called Youngstown, Ohio, which you can't see very well with the lights on, but it's up in northeast Ohio on the border between Pennsylvania and Ohio. Sure. Which mic? This one? Okay. So Youngstown, Ohio, as I said, is northeast Ohio in the foothills of Appalachia. It is rich. Can you all see okay? Okay. It is rich in iron ore, and the coal industry, and thereby the steel-making industry, was its bread and butters from the early 1920s all the way to the end of the 1970s, which for all intensive purposes, Youngstown's steel industry ceased to exist. Now, many of you were born in this century, so I ask that you please don't do the math. But it was in this setting, in 1981, that I was born. And I spent the next 18 years in a town that was struggling to find purpose and relevance in a rapidly globalizing world, in a family that was religious and occasionally by today's standards would probably be called dogmatic, But even within the dogma, my family were curious, optimistic, and they were always mission-driven people. And from the age of 8 years old or on, I would often spend, my sister and I actually would spend a week or two each summer with my family, my dad's family, in a town called Mansfield, Ohio. And you can see my dad's family up there. My dad, if you can see it, is the baby sitting on the lap of the very stern-looking man in a three-piece suit. And behind him is my Aunt Frida. Now, my dad's oldest sister, Aunt Frida, was remarkable for many reasons. She was strong, she was determined, she was altruistic, she was pragmatic, she was adventurous, and she was kind. She was everything I wanted to be when I grew up, and each summer I would spend time with her. And in spending that time with her, I learned that when she was in her 30s, when her kids were all grown up, she decided to change her uncomfortable life, and she decided to get an LPN at a local diploma training program. And then from that, she went on to get her ADN because she wanted to spend her time helping women and children. And for many years she did as a public health nurse in the Richland County Public Health Department. My Aunt Frida remained committed to caring for others and for seeing them who they were as her equal, using her gifts and talents to help them achieve the best health possible until the day she died almost 4 years ago. So it was a surprise to no one, oh, the contrast is bad here, but it was a surprise to no one that when I went to college that I wanted to become a nurse, right? I grew up in a community that had laid a few paths for me at the time, and the one that I chose was nursing. And I was fortunate enough to get into The Ohio State University, which is a school I would 100% not get into by admission standards today. And that's when I started to deviate or rebel a little bit against the norms of my community. Certainly the norms of Ohio State University at the time, and to some degree, even the nursing profession. So this is Ohio State, if you've never been there, this is called the Oval. Things started out normal enough by freshman year, right? we were a 3-year, we weren't a direct admit program, we were a 3-year program, so you have to take your classes your first year and then apply to be a nurse in the middle of that first year. And that first year was pretty heavy. It was mostly natural sciences, lots of organic chemistry, and I got a lot of B's and C's that first year, and I was frankly happy to pass. But it was during the winter of that freshman year that I took a course that I never imagined would have the impact on me that it did. Sociology 101. I remember the exact classroom just off of the Ohio State Oval that I was sitting in when we started studying Irving Goffman's dramaturgical approach to sociology, right? And it's not unlike giving an endowed lecture. Sociology, dramaturgy postulates that everything, all of our human interactions, the way we move our hands, the way we eat our food, even the way we walk into a room is dependent on our time, place, and even the audience. Right? People, all of us, perceive ourselves and our identity as one that is constantly made, remade, and even redefined by our every interaction with each other. It was inspired by Shakespeare. In fact, his words were the ones in our textbook 101 to define dramaturgy, and they said, all the world's a stage, and the men and the women are merely players, and one man or woman in their time plays many parts. Now, friends, this may seem extremely naive to all of you right now, but at that moment, the idea that I was an agent in creating the life that I wanted to have was actually, for me, fairly revolutionary, right? I knew my path. I knew my path coming into Ohio State. I was going to be a nurse, I was going to get married, I was going to have 6 kids, attend church every Sunday, and probably live and die in the exact same community that I was raised in. Didn't have 6 kids. And I'll digress for just a moment because I think this is important. There would have been absolutely nothing wrong if that had been the path I had chosen, right? Many of the people I love dearly and the people who made me the woman that I am today chose that path, and they are incredibly happy with their lives. It was just not to be my path. So instead, I became more and more engaged with the required liberal arts part of our baccalaureate in nursing education. My grades improved, stopped getting B's and C's, and during spring quarter of my freshman year, I was feeling confident enough to apply to the BSN Honors Nursing Program. I still have the letter from a brilliant faculty member. Her name was Dr. Karen Nahievich. She's recently retired from Ohio State. And this letter said that, unfortunately, I was not selected to be part of the BSN Honors Program because my freshman GPA, remember all those B's and C's? They weren't high enough. There was a type of student who belonged in that honors program, a program I will point out whose sole purpose was introducing nursing students to research, and I was not that type of student. But in hindsight, I actually took it with a grain of salt, right? That summer, I enrolled in courses, and I took Western Civilization and the required English writing course. And I also worked pretty hard as a local hospital secretary. And come fall quarter of my sophomore year, which was my first quarter as an official nursing student when I got to put those scrubs on, I wrote to Dr. Nahievich again and asked her if there was any room. I would love to still be considered for a spot in the honors program. Well, to my surprise, she wrote back, and she said someone had dropped out that summer. Very flattering. And if I want the spot, it was mine. Well, I did want the spot, and I wrote her back immediately, and I let her know that I wanted it. And I spent the next 3 years in the honors program. Up to that point, I was the only OSU nursing student to ever transfer to the honors program mid-quarter. But I hope I wasn't the last. And it was this program with these mentors. The training, the mentorship I received, the support of my remarkable classmates that opened my eyes to the possibility of a future in science and the significance that that could have. And while it ignited my interest and love for science and led to my first database publication, which you can see up here, that, coupled with the love of sociology and public policy, helped me to decide to go to Washington, D.C. for my fifth year at Ohio State, right? Now, I certainly went against the wishes of my family. I certainly went against the wishes of Ohio State because they had their 4-year matriculation plan that they had to get me out by. And it went against the wishes of a lot of my colleagues because they had never heard of a student nurse interning in Washington, D.C. And this could be the story, right? It's been told many times before, of yet another undergraduate student working in DC who falls in love with the seductive power of our nation's capital and then just decides to move there after graduation to change the world. I know hundreds of dear friends who've chosen this path, but it was not to be my path. Though I did love my time as a John Glenn Public Policy Fellow, right? Meeting the senator, his wife, his team, I found all of it absolutely transformative. Yet that quarter's lasting and more consequential impact is that it put me on the path to becoming a nurse scientist. That story, which probably much longer than we have time for today, involves an incredible and forward-looking mentor who told me once that the power of Washington, D.C. might be the almighty dollar, but the power and the currency of health policy is actually data. And that getting a PhD would actually allow me to change more lives and have a bigger impact than any other degree would at the time. So I came back from DC, but not for long, because that summer, about 2 weeks later, in 2002, I went with a group of other Ohio State students who were convinced we were all going to change the world and spent the summer exploring the exploding HIV crisis in sub-Saharan Africa, in fact, in a country that was called the Kingdom of Swaziland. It was during this summer, right, after much agonizing and second-guessing myself, that I finally decided what my next step was going to be. I was going to pursue a PhD in nursing science and focus on global HIV policy. Now, for many of you, and I look around the room and I realize this, It's probably almost impossible to imagine. But at this time, in the early 2000s, sub-Saharan Africa was experiencing an exploding AIDS crisis. The medications that we have today that have made HIV basically a chronic disease were not scaled up yet. And even when we could get those medications, they were terrible. People would take 10 to 12 pills a day, and the side effects were so toxic, most people would rather risk their life than take the medications. And the stigma at that time, probably hard to imagine, but the stigma from HIV and AIDS in Africa and globally robbed people of HIV of their livelihoods, of their families, and often their identities. So I was there, I was experiencing this. I was doing what we called hospice at home at the time, and I thought to myself, gosh, if that mentor in DC was right, if data really had the power to change the world and to change the health of people, this was the group of people that I wanted to try to spend my life working towards. I wanted to help figure out how we could improve the lives of people living with and affected by HIV. I'll be honest. At this point, no one really knew what to do with me, right? There was no well-trodden path for anybody, much less a nursing student from Ohio State to Africa to health policy leader, right? The closest at the time was a remarkable woman by the name of Christine Gebbe. I considered applying, I shared this story with a few last night, I considered applying to the London School of Economics, but was told that as a nursing student, I would not be competitive for the Marshall Scholarship. Almost everyone, every single person in my life told me to just take time, work as a nurse, while I figured out the next logical step. And it seemed like good advice, and in fact, I was getting rejected from my lofty aspirations so much, I really considered it. But there was something inside of me that said, don't stop, right? You're on to something. Find the people and find the places that are not afraid of going against the grain and creating new norms. And so for me, as you heard, that place was about as far from Youngstown, Ohio as you can imagine, right? It was across the country at the University of California at San Francisco, a town I had never been to before. This was so outside the norms of my community that my own family did not believe me when I proudly said that I was going to UCSF after graduation to pursue a PhD in nursing science. I can still remember them saying to me, Allison, no one gets a PhD in nursing. What are you really doing in San Francisco? It took me a long time to realize that they didn't think I was lying to them, or that I didn't deserve to get a PhD. But the norms in my community at that time were such that people just did not get doctorates, right? In fact, even today, the only people who they know are doctors are actual medical doctors. It wasn't a lack of faith in my ability to achieve my goals. It was a lack of imagination on their part. And so I moved across the country to the fabled San Francisco all by myself, right? The culture and the enemy I experienced was as enveloping as the fog that San Francisco is famous for. I had a cohort of almost 35 PhD students, and I was the youngest person by a lot, right? I routinely had to answer the question of what could I possibly know about nursing science if I hadn't spent a decade working on the floor as a nurse, right? My mentor, a dear friend and colleague now, used to scare me so much I would walk into his room and like break the caps off pens because I was so anxious. He was so accomplished and is, and knows so much about science that I never thought I would ever live up to his standards. But slowly over time, as one does, I began to make friends, right? I figured out where the Kroger's was. Do you guys have Kroger's here? The grocery store? Okay. I figured out, I didn't have a car, so I figured out how to navigate the Muni, which is the public transportation system there. And finally, I let myself explore the cosmopolitan bounty that is San Francisco. And I learned to love science, right? Through the first 2.5 years of taking core PhD classes, I learned to love the discipline of science, its rigor, the challenge of dreaming it, of doing it, and writing it up. By the end of those first 2.5 years, I found it absolutely intoxicating. Now, this reference might be lost on at least the students in the room. But growing up, I would watch a lot of John Hughes movies, right? 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, right? There's a channel called TBS that used to run these dinner and a movies every Friday night, and I would watch them religiously every single week. And all of these movies convinced me that one comes of age during high school, right? When you're 16 or 17 years old. A point at which, when I was a doctoral student at UCSF, I had long passed. But I'll tell you what I learned about myself during those 5 years and the type of person and scholar and professional and friend that I wanted to be was so much richer than any Hollywood scriptwriter, including John Hughes, could ever have written. Now, I think I've spent almost 20 minutes sharing with you all foundational stories about how you can be a rebel or a misfit in your own chosen community. And sometimes that's right to put you on the path that is right for you. It's not a lot of science here, and I'll get to that, right? I haven't showed you a lot of data, but before I share with you all just how shattering, earth-shattering, our data on non-pharmacological approaches to healthy aging is, I'm going to share just one more story, right? And this is the one where my personal life and my professional life collide in a way that has in many ways redefined, I would even say made my career. So I told you I went to UCSF to become a health policy scholar, right? Follow in the footsteps of Senator Glenn and Christine Gebbe. And along the way, I realized just how much I loved clinical research, right? I loved working with patients. I loved asking questions that mattered to the patients that I found interesting and answering them in a way that respected the population for which we hope to return the knowledge to. Shortly after I arrived in San Francisco, I was sharing this tension I had with my advisor, and he helped me navigate, which turns out to be a really politically treacherous switch from the health policy track to the clinical research track at that time. And eventually I decided on what I thought was the perfect dissertation topic, right? It blended my love of sociology with clinical research. It had health systems and health policy, and it had a marginalized population. I, in the brilliance of only a 24-year-old, decided that I was going to conduct a randomized clinical trial, testing the effectiveness of a peer-based intervention in women living with HIV. It had everything. It had rigor. It had a marginalized and highly prioritized population at the time. And eventually, I was able to secure a prestigious award from the National Institutes of Health called an F31 Dissertation Training Award. Now, looking back on that time, and I have to be honest, cringing every time I read that dissertation, I, honest to God, cannot believe that I completed a 3-month randomized clinical trial of a behavioral intervention as my doctoral dissertation, right? I have no idea why my advisors let me do that. I really don't, and I've never let one of my students do it. But clearly, what I lacked for an experience, I made up with audacity and an equal amount of tenacity. But accomplish it I did. And with the help of a lot of friends, after all the procedures were done and analyzed, I had to face the fact that the intervention that I was convinced was going to work and was going to be the foundation of what was going to be a brilliant career was in fact null, right? Null results, right? It means nothing worked, right? I was so sure this intervention was going to work, right? But it did not improve symptom management. It did not improve symptom experience. It did not improve quality of life. It did not improve engagement in care. It did not improve a single one of the outcomes I had thought it was going to improve, right? But I'd done it. And not only had I done it, but I had conceived of and led a randomized clinical trial in one of the most complex populations at the time. It was enough to publish my first independent manuscripts, which you see up here, as well as my most cited systematic review, and earn my PhD from the University of California, San Francisco. And it helped me earn a KL2 spot as a postdoctoral scholar at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. So, the husband I had picked up along the way and I packed up our blue Mini Cooper, and we got back on I-70 and moved back from San Francisco to our home state of Ohio. I was going to spend the next 4 years becoming a leader in HIV self-management research and surely get my R01 in record time. Clearly, my ego had survived the many trials and tribulations of a rigorous doctorate education just fine. So I moved to Cleveland in the summer of 2009, which was a bit of a tumultuous time for the global economy for those of you who were in the workforce back then. And while many efforts were made to prevent institutions that were deemed too big to fail, investment in our scientific enterprise declined. But I didn't notice it, right? I was happily strolling along, conducting cutely named studies like the self study and the trip study and the managed study, which taught me a lot, and I believe they added key knowledge to the field. Oops, excuse me. So I was going to just show you a few of those, and I know the resolution's a little tricky, but they are all published, and I'd be happy to share them if you would like more interest. So many of these actually were pretty foundational and helped to launch almost a 20-year program of research, right? And building on what I had learned, in fact, in that null dissertation, I realized that I had to go back and really understand the perspective of self-management truly from the women themselves. So I proposed the managed study. And the managed study was a multi-site instrument development study designing the first HIV self-management tool specific to women. And like I said, after my dissertation was null, I knew I really had to go back to the drawing board. So that's what this, and you can kind of see the 3 phases over on, I think, your left, yeah. And so through truly a network of friends and colleagues and kindred spirits I had developed while I was a student at UCSF, I was actually able, believe it or not, to convince a few friends, I actually don't know how the IRB approved this now, but to convince a few friends of mine to work for free. And we conducted a 2-site instrument development study with focus groups in Cleveland, Ohio, and in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now, these friends, who are still friends to this day, were incredibly generous. But what I wanted to share with all of you was that during that experience, I realized just how hard it is, yet critically important, for scientists to learn how to negotiate mutually beneficial outcomes, both for themselves and for the colleagues they hope to solicit their impact for. And I've used that skill ever since in building research teams. And it was with the help of these colleagues in 3 phases and more than 250 women that we created the world's first HIV self-management scale. If you're interested, it has 3 domains, over 20 items: the daily practices of HIV self-management, social support and HIV self-management, and then understanding the chronicity of HIV self-management and how it influences their day-to-day practices. And to date, it continues to be used, but it's been used in more than a dozen studies and is still being used in countries in the US, Korea, South Africa, Ethiopia, China, and then across various populations, some of which they have not been validated in, but we've continued to work with them to do that work. And so when starting the managed study all those years ago, I thought the resulting scale would actually be the most important part of that study. But in hindsight, I actually think it was a lesser known, incidental paper that had a bigger impact on science, clinical care, and public health. if you can think back a couple of slides to that first box in the diagram, the first part of the managed study was a series of focus groups explicitly asking the question, what women living with HIV thought was important about how they manage their day-to-day health, right? And within the many, if you've ever done focus groups, you get many, many volumes of qualitative data. And within that was a thread about the significance of exercise and getting strong for women living with HIV. And here, I won't read this to you, it does project okay, but here's a great quote describing how women living with HIV practice physical activity, even in the absence of equipment, right? And pay attention to the bylines out there, because this was published in JNAC, the journal I'm now the editor-in-chief of, in early 2012. And it was at that time among the very first evidence describing just how important physical activity was to this population, but also how ignored it was by their healthcare providers. And so while I am conducting all of these focus groups, right, listening to these women talk about how they wanted to be stronger, I received a phone call that I will never forget. And this is the one where my personal life and my professional life collide, right? I was sitting in my office, which as a postdoc was a closet in the basement of a building that was covered in asbestos. And my dermatologist called me to tell me that the nevia that they had removed from my left knee at my own insistence was in fact stage 3B melanoma. I was, at 29 years old, I was diagnosed with malignant melanoma. And now we have come a very long way from 2010 when I was first diagnosed, right? But at that time, the standard most aggressive treatment that you would do for a relatively young patient was a year of high-dose interferon that was following 2 surgeries in which they removed most of my lymph nodes on that side. None of that was easy stuff. And if you guys haven't studied interferon yet, the thing that you should know about it is that it's cumulative. So all of the side effects, the fatigue, the lethargy, the depression, the weight loss, all of it gets worse the longer you're on this treatment. It's bad stuff, but it's also really, really effective when you give it exogenously. So I'm still conducting the managed study. And I learned a lot during that first part of the managed study. But the one thing that stuck out to me, right, the one thing that has imprinted upon me ever since was that so many women who were going through what many thought was the hardest thing they could possibly imagine, right? Being diagnosed and living with HIV, didn't just want to survive. They wanted to thrive. They wanted their physicians, they wanted their nurses, their social workers, their nutritionists, their pharmacists, their families, their community to help them engage in strategies that would make them stronger, more vital, and more connected to themselves and to their community. And with all of that swirling in my mind while I was on interferon, during the 11th month of my treatment, it was November, I remember it very well, I was in a long Thanksgiving turkey burn class. Does anyone know what that is? You basically spend 75 minutes on what we would now call a Peloton. We didn't call them that back then. But during this class, there's a theme when you're in these, because your instructors want to take you on a journey and keep you engaged. And the theme for this turkey burn was the Iditarod dog race. Does anyone know this story? Few people over the age of 25, right? So for those of you who don't know it, over 100 years ago, in January of 1925, there was a diphtheria outbreak in Nome, Washington. Now, if you don't know what diphtheria is, it's a pretty bad respiratory disease that for many years we haven't seen much of it, but at that time there wasn't a vaccine. So there was this outbreak in this very remote rural community, and I don't really know what a particularly bad winter in Alaska is, but this was apparently one of them. And the very rudimentary planes that they normally would fly from Anchorage to Nome, they couldn't take because the sky was unpassable, as were the roads and the train lines. So the governor of Alaska decided to do something that they hadn't done in a while, which was have a dog sled relaying the serum, the anti-diphtheria serum, 1,000 miles from Anchorage all the way to Nome. And every 20 miles, they would switch out dog sleds and drivers. And it was very bad. It was very treacherous. You know, the stories of this account even say that at one point the wind was so bad it blew the sled over and the diphtheria serum went flying and landed in the snow, which is a very nice visual, but also very scary. But nonetheless, they made it all the way to Nome and everyone recovered. And this is the story over 75 minutes that this spin instructor was telling us, trying to get us through that final minute of the spin class. And he was a former coach. And he said something that he probably said a million times to the athletes he was coaching. But at that moment in time, it stuck with me forever. He said, remember, folks, someday your mind will fail and your body will go. But today is not that day. And that experience, all of it, right? The managed study, the other research that was going on, the spin class, right? The interferon I was going through, all of it started to come together, just like the two paths you see before you, together with a lot of the data that we were accumulating in my postdoc that really, for me, forced a shift or perhaps a honing of my own program of research, right? I wasn't just focusing on the tasks that people had to do to manage their disease. I wanted to understand, just like for myself, how people and women living with HIV thrive and how they could age well. And this thread would become stronger in our next study, which again, cutely named was TRIP. And this is where we explored, among other things, stress, isolation, and physical activity in adults living with HIV. Right, in this, and we called it a longitudinal study. That's a little generous, it was just 2 time points. But this is the first time that we deliberately assessed physical activity and used the 7-day physical activity recall report. And we discovered, as you can see, a lot of, I would say, interesting relationships, right? And they were certainly novel for the population, but they included understanding that physical activity and fatigue were inversely related to each other, that physical activity patterns varied by age and gender, and that those with more social resources were able to engage in more physical activity and health promoting behavior, right? And you're probably looking at me saying, well, obviously. And all of those were expected and hypothesized relationships. But there was no data on it up to that point, right? So we thought that that made sense, but no one had data demonstrating this. And it was these data that I would say ever so slightly, in fact, the TRIP study was one of our, also very highly cited for a long time, but it was these data that really started to slowly shift our field to think about, okay, living with HIV is about more than just taking your medications and preventing onward transmission, right? Living with HIV is about aging well. And what are the components of that? And so this is when, like early 2012, 2013, when these were published then, when we started to actually start to shift that conversation. And we weren't the only ones. There were other teams that were doing this at the same time. But it was part of a shift that, you know, looking back, I think was really pivotal. So we had all this data. We had lots of descriptive data, right? And it was all telling us that people living with HIV did not self-report exercising anywhere near the recommended guidelines. But we also had data showing clearly that this is a population that wanted to be more physically active, that wanted to gain more strength, and they wanted their healthcare team and their healthcare system to help them do this. So what did we do next? I won't ask for audience participation. But what we did next was we were going to pilot test an intervention to improve lifestyle exercise, right? Ideally as preliminary data for a larger R01. I'm going to skip over the many details of that because I can share them all with you in these publications. But now we started to write a protocol for what was my second randomized clinical trial in my career. And this one I was convinced was going to be my piece de resistance. In fact, we liked it so much we gave it the name, the Bobcat study. So this study, it tested a lifestyle approach to improving not just physical activity, but also nutrition. And it was fairly successful. We were able to enroll and get lots of studies nested under this protocol. It led to more than a dozen manuscripts. And finally, one outcome that was positive: reducing carbohydrate intake and body weight, right? That's a pretty important outcome, especially in the mid-2010s, right? And this study was also important because it was the first time we started to measure more objective outcomes, right? We did fMRI neurocognitive function. We did pericardial fat measured by CT. We did cardiovascular strength fitness training on these patients. We also measured muscle strength, systemic inflammation, and this is the first time that we actually measured physical activity using 7-day actigraphy, which is a gold standard for physical activity in kind of free living populations. The other measure we didn't do it fully as a triple pass. I think we did it as a single pass, but it was the first time we assessed 24-hour diet using a recall with trained nutritionists. So these are all foundational pieces that were really allowing us to start to build a program of work and expertise in both the substantive and methodological techniques that would be required later on in our career. Oh, you can't see this at all. What this slide would like to show you, for those of you on the live cast, you can probably see it, was that up to this point, a lot of my research was funded by internal grants, right? Small foundation grants, pilot grants, even a couple of pretty small investigator initiative industry grants. I had not, up to that point, and this was done through about 2018, been successful at obtaining NIH funding, or federal funding, which is the gold standard of research funding for most academic researchers. But it wasn't for lack of trying, right? And if you could see this slide, I like to tend to show it to early career investigators and students because I think there is this tendency to think that every time you read about a new grant or you hear about someone's success, you don't know all the failures behind it, right? And this next slide, you can not see it all, but the first, on this axis right here, you can see I had submitted some years 4 to 5 federal grants, and none of them hit. None of them, right? I think I had gone through a span of like 12 not discussed grants, which was, for most people, probably would have been pretty earth-shattering, but as I told you, I had a lot of tenacity, and I believed in his research question. But then what happened right around 2018 is actually what happens a lot in this business, and looking back on it, which is that success came very, very slowly, and then all at once, right? We got 3 grants back to back, and I'll tell you a little bit about those. And the reason we were able to do that was because even though I got all of these not discussed grants, they're called pink sheets in our business, even though I kept getting all of these pink sheets telling me, as reviewer 3 always does, that we didn't need to know any more about exercise. Everyone knows they have to exercise, right? But we didn't know what type or how much or what frequency or what the what the outcomes would be, right? We didn't know any of these things for this population because the first 30 years of the history of the HIV epidemic for many people was a death sentence. They didn't think about how they were going to be strong and stave off frailty in the 1889, right? We told them not to worry about it. So they were extremely deconditioned. They were deconditioned to a point about 25% lower than their age and sex matched non-HIV infected counterparts. So I gathered all this data, right? And so for about 5 or 6 years between 2013 and 2018, we published, my team, almost 100 papers basically saying, here's what we know as a field, here's what we don't know, and here's why it matters. I'm going to come back to this because it's really incumbent upon research to demonstrate why the questions they're trying to answer matter not just to science, but also to clinical practice and to public health. And I also was able to form during this time collaborations, even if they didn't want to buy my argument. My backup strategy was to form collaborations with lots of researchers who had been NIH funded. So I did this, right? I got a team full of there were only 2 of us who hadn't been NIH funded, and we were the co-PIs. Everybody else had a 30-year history of having NIH funding. And I was able to do that by carefully, as I mentioned earlier, negotiating what the investigators would want to get the outcome that we would want. And all of that resulted in what has truly been one of I think the things I'm proudest of in our career, which is the PROSPER HIV study. And the PROSPER HIV study is a descriptive and truly longitudinal study that has the premise that at the time we proposed it, and really to today, we don't have rigorous objective data that characterizes physical activity and diet intake among people living with HIV over time. And so we couldn't do what MESA and the Jackson Heart study and the Nurses' Health study had done, which is to truly characterize the relationship between the potential impact of these non-pharmacological strategies on patient-centered and patient-reported outcomes, right? We knew in the aggregate exercise improves life, but no one could tell me how they improve a symptom cluster that's a GI cluster or a neurocognitive cluster. That data didn't exist. So we enrolled a little over 700 patients. Mind you, in 2019 and 2020, we enrolled 705 patients in Boston, Birmingham, Cleveland, and Seattle. And we asked all of these older adults living with HIV to complete gold standard measures, right? So this meant they wore an actigraph on their trunk for 7 to 10 days, and then they would mail it back to us. And they would also complete 3 24-hour dietary recalls within 30 days with a trained nutritionist at our nutrition coordinating center. Everyone told us this couldn't be done. This is a messy population. Nobody would adhere to this protocol, right? But they did, right? And they did this once a year for 3 years, even during the craziness of COVID, which most of us have tried to block out. In addition to doing that study, even this idea finally took root enough that we were able to get 2 NIH administrative supplements to support 2 early career faculty members. We also were able to nest someone's K23 and R21 and dozens of other smaller pilot or internal funding mechanisms within. And all of those studies, it's close to 2 dozen, have been published with just our baseline data to date, right? We did things like confirm that controlling for age, sex, employment, and for those of you in the HIV space, integrase inhibitors, that steps per day or physical activity, the only physical activity this population really engages in, is associated with reduced abdominal adiposity, which is actually a really big debate in our field because these medications do tend to cause a lot of central adiposity. In addition, for those of you who work in the geriatric space, we were able to validate a modification of the Fried's frailty phenotype that we could do without, for example, hand grip measures in the clinical setting. And so that this tool could be more readily available for clinics that didn't have access to some of those more specific tools that are needed or the time to conduct them, and really help to risk stratify the patients who were most at risk for frailty and falls. And then one of my mentees used this data to characterize the inflammatory phenotype. So what is the inflammatory milieu that is associated with all of this subcutaneous adiposity in this population? That's one of his papers up here on the right. And another recently used it to describe a topic, which I even saw in the posters, between hazardous drinking and the risk of falls in this population. So we, 3 weeks ago, finally presented the main results. And our hypotheses, certainly for physical activity, were confirmed. We're still teasing out. Now, 24-hour dietary recall gives you about 1,000 variables. So we're still teasing out all of our dietary recalls. But if we look at the aggregate number, which is the Healthy Eating Index 2015, we did confirm that more physical activity, which in this population really is only steps per day because they engage in almost no moderate to vigorous physical activity, was associated with better symptom management, including, we were really excited, some information on first time we've seen this data reported in population level for neurocognitive outcomes and symptoms. And then we also showed that sedentary time is inversely associated because we, again, objectively measured sedentary time in this population for the first time. So we're going to get more of those out, and we're going to tease out the dietary data over the next 2 to 3 months, but we are excited that we confirmed our hypotheses. And I also just wanted to share, because I did mention kind of the all-at-once part, share a few of the other studies we've been working on, and if we should have a few minutes for questions and answers, I could address any of them. But the Extra CVD study was a nurse-led study to reduce cardiovascular risk factors in adults, really clinics that serve adults living with HIV. It was an implementation science study, and we did show that we were able to reduce different cholesterol measures and hypertension in this population using this nurse-led model, and we have a lot of cost indicators for clinics potentially using it. And then the health study is the other one I'll focus on, and health COG is a secondary RO1 that looks at the same protocol, so I'll describe it now. The health study was a randomized clinical trial. It was a superiority trial with 120 older adults. This one was really supposed to be just at 2 sites, right? At Seattle and at Denver. But then I have a colleague at Birmingham, Alabama, who liked the protocol so much, she wrote a grant and she was able to get a secondary grant looking not at physical function and mitochondrial energetics, which were our primary outcomes, but looking at fMRI-derived neurocognitive function. So she's going to actually have some of the first objective data looking at high-intensity interval training and continuous moderate exercise in this population. We did just publish the main results last month. They found that contrary to our hypotheses, HIIT was not superior to improve physical function and fatigue, but really both interventions significantly improved physical function and fatigue from baseline using probably 12 different measures of physical function and 2 different measures of fatigue. So really solid evidence here that exercise works, and the bottom line for patients, we tell them is, we don't care what you do, just do it, and do it at least 3 times a week for 45 minutes. That will help you significantly, and it will help your longevity and improve your physical function over the lifespan. But, don't just take the numbers. If you're a qualitative person, listen to their own words, right? And here were a few of the quotes that our patients in the health study shared with us. Again, I won't read them to you, but what you can really see here is a theme of how important exercise and being physically active and by extension, participating in this research was for these patients. Many describe it as the catalyst they need to really start a new journey at the age of 55 or 60 to really start living the life that they want to live. And for us, that's exactly the message we want to get out to all patients, not just older patients living with HIV. It's never too late to start being physically active and to, frankly, do it in a highly rigorous fashion. Like, we train these people for 45 minutes, 3 times a week. We supervise them, we pushed them. We made them, it was a progressive regimen, so they had to increase 5 to 10% of both their cardiovascular output as well as their 1 RM strength training each week. It was phenomenal, right? So much for knowing everything we needed to know about exercise in older adults living with HIV. If I was going to summarize our work, and this is not my phrase, I stole this from a very influential article in the early 2000s, but our work and others, I believe, does confirm the hypothesis, at least among older adults living with HIV, and I believe in many other vulnerable, often overlooked populations in research. Exercise is one of the few single strategies that can improve physical, mental, emotional, and social health. And I think there is actually, and this is important to get out there, there's growing evidence that exercise is good, it's safe, and it's an underutilized intervention in this population, and yet there continue to be gaps, right? We don't fully have a sense of the type of tailoring that's needed. In fact, that's the premise of a grant we have under review next week. So fingers crossed that the council likes it. And we are calling that study the Prospering Study. And we're running out of time here. I could talk about our research forever, but I did try to distill it down to these 4 points up here for you all, right? And you can see them here. Listen to your patients. Don't wait for an invitation to do the science that you want to do, right? Share your evidence and how you frame your research and the work that you do to the public matters. Okay. Taken you on a bit of a roller coaster over the last 45 minutes, and I thank you for that. And I'm going to just share a few parting thoughts if you'll let me, right? The first is this: science is a team sport. I hope one of the lessons you take away from my time today is that science is a team sport, right? There was a time when science was a hobby, yes, a hobby, not a job, of mostly rich white men conducted in their well-appointed studies or in their ivory towers, right? The story of my career, I hope, is that it has only been possible because of the teams of people who have helped to carry me and our science over the finish line. Wander off path. Listen, if you're in a PhD program, I know those 5-year plans are very, very common, or if you're a first-year assistant professor, right? Well-trodden paths of rules work so well for some. But I believe that, as the poet wrote, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And I believe we're better off for it. And lastly, trust data. But you also need to trust yourself, right? Existing data that's out there is necessarily limited by the imagination of others. But you and your vision for how your science is going to fit into the larger world is up to you. And lastly, science is not abstract, right? The data that you generate or that you're looking for or using in the clinical setting should be contextualized in the larger environment in which it exists, and the story of high impact discovery needs to be the very essence of storytelling, right? I believe that now, more than ever, scientists must be able to not just generate excitement, but also understanding about what we do through the story of our research. Oh man, I'm 2 minutes over. All right, thank you all, and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webble, for such a wonderful, inspirational talk. As a token of our appreciation for your time, we give you a little gift.
Thank
I
you.
hope you remember us when you go off to the University of Michigan.
Thank you.
And now I would like to invite Dr. Yuha, please, and Dr. Henley for the presentation of some of our award winners.
That was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone who are engaged during also presenting posters. And special thanks to our judge, Dr. Webble, and Dr. Angela Silvestri Elmore, and Dr. Jennifer Panis, and Dr. Jinyoung Kim. Thank you. So we judge the poster with the primary presenter exists. So that's just what I wanted to display.
Let me just say, I did not do any of the judging, so I'm not responsible.
Without further ado, as we call on you, if you can please come up. I'm going to scoot over here so there's time, there's space. Okay, drum roll, please. For the student category, third place goes to Dehini Pereira. Supported by Dr. Hannah Lee and Dr. Brenda Delgado. Congratulations. Stick around for a second and take a picture with Yuha, Dr. Lee. Second place, drum roll please. Nikki Rose, Ty Albright. She's in her rebel red. Congratulations, Nikki. Supported by Dr.
and get these glued to my head and everything else. So, yeah.
Yes, you needed to explain yourself. Okay, so congratulations to our student winners. Now we proceed on with our faculty category. Drum roll, please. Third place goes to Dr. Nicole Wheeler, Dr. Lisa Douglas, and Nicole is on the overflow. If you hear us, one. Okay, in the meantime, we'll go to the next award winners. Tied in first place. Tied. Ooh. It's a hard job for these judges today. Tied in first place in no particular order. Dr. Jackie Killian, Emily Boyce, and Jennifer Fanis. As we wrap up, I just want to say a quick thank you again to all of you who came out, supported our lectureship, and truly embraced this culture of research, scholarship, and discovery. And also, I would be remiss in not saying thank you to everyone who worked behind the scenes to make this event very successful. You know who you are. Thank you so much, including, of course, Luz, who had to come out from her office and run over and drop off. Thank you, Luz, so much. And thank you to all the students. Oh, there's Nicole. Come on, Dr. Leland. Get your award.
We're going up here again. Put your steps in. Yeah.
Dr. Nicholas, Lisa. She's up there.
Lisa!
Okay, calling on Lisa. Nicholas. And Dr. Vandalin. I don't know if she's here. They are. Oh, they're next door. Okay.
We're trying to know the routes.
And for those of you who have burning questions for Dr. Allison Webble, she's going to stick around for just a few minutes before she retires to her hotel room. She's probably very exhausted from having spent the day with us. But come up and say hello and ask your questions.
Exercise 30 minutes.
I didn't know, like,
The most important thing is add some strength.
Oh, yes.
you need to do that for the third up, right?
You don't have to do weights. You can do lots of weights. Adding some sort of strength.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Like sprints, breaks, and something you get like benching.